Hey everyone, Laura here. I'm in Brussels this week for ETHCC and other events such as Open Finance Day and Modular Summit. It's been a really lovely time and I've met a bunch of great people. At Modular Summit, hosted by Celestia and Maven 11, I had a fireside chat with Mustafa Al-Bassam, the co-founder of Celestia and the CEO of Celestia Labs. It was a really fun and entertaining conversation since he regaled us with tales of his time hacking a range of organizations such as the U.S. government contractor and the Westboro Baptist Church. From there, we moved on to how his journey into Bitcoin ended up with him co-founding Celestia, and then got into some of Celestia's current roadmap and what exciting new features are on the way. I hope you enjoy our chat. And now, on to the conversation with Mustafa. Video accounts for over half of total internet traffic. PlayFi's protocol turns content into data with cutting-edge AI and blockchain. Learn more at playfi.ai. Polkadot is the original and leading Layer 0 blockchain with over 2,000 plus developers. And the Polkadot 2.0 upgrade will be a massive accelerator for the ecosystem. Join the community at polkadot.network/ecosystem/community. With iTrust Capital, you can buy and sell crypto in a tax-advantaged retirement account. Enjoy significant tax advantages, 24/7 access, and the industry's lowest fees. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to this fireside chat with me and Mustafa. So some of you might know that he has a very interesting personal story. So we're actually going to start with that. You know, as a teenager, you were what's called a hacktivist. You were involved in LulzSec, or I think that was your group, and Anonymous. But before we get to that story, I just want to even hear about your childhood, because that, I feel like, sort of sets the stage for what happened next.
So, I was born in Iraq, in Baghdad, and I moved to the UK as a refugee when I was 5, moved to London. And I, it was like southeast, London on a housing estate. And I had my first experience with a computer when I was 6 or 5. And this was like a Windows 95 computer. And that was my first introduction to computers. And from there, I was just very curious. And I think this is it's actually a very common story with a lot of people who learn programming from an early age. And I came across software like Microsoft Front Page, which was like this software in the Microsoft Office suite that lets you create your own website. And I experimented with that. And that's how I first got into technology and coding.
And so from there, how did you end up, I guess, engaging with these different hackers and becoming a hacker yourself?
Yeah, so I started to figure out how to create my own websites using programming languages like PHP. And as I was doing that, I realized the ways that people could make mistakes, or programmers could make mistakes when they're creating or programming their websites to create security flaws. And as I was thinking about that, every time I would visit a website, I would see if it's vulnerable to what I think it's vulnerable to. So for example, one day I was doing my maths homework, and I didn't have a calculator with me. So I Googled for online calculator, and it turned out there was this flaw in the calculator that you can, instead of typing 1 + 1 in the calculator, you could type in computer code into the calculator and execute that computer code. And this was a calculator that was run on this American university server. So it was really interesting to me that you could hack a university through a broken calculator on the website. And that's how I first realized that you could actually hack into things, or things could have security flaws. But then I was also very interested in accessing software or media that I couldn't afford to access at the time. And back then, the BitTorrent and the Pirate Bay was a very popular way of accessing that kind of information for free. This was before Netflix existed or other streaming services existed. And to me, BitTorrent was really interesting because it was like a peer-to-peer file sharing system that did not rely on centralized entities. And to me, it was evidence that we didn't need a centralized internet. But I first got into activism when there was a group called Anonymous that was conducting a denial of service attack against the Motion Picture Association of America and the RIAA, which was trying to take down the Pirate Bay. And then these people organized a denial of service attack against those companies. And then so I kind of got involved into these hacker chat rooms, and that's how I kind of got into the hacker scene. And then it kind of ended up with me creating my own hacker group called LulzSec that kind of in the summer of 2011 went into a kind of like a massive hacking spree that hacked into all kinds of organizations like Sony, FBI affiliates, Fox News, and like a bunch of other corporations, including military contractors.
And so there's just so many stories there, but do you have any favorites?
Yeah, I mean, so like I guess like part of the point of it was political, but a big part of it was back then, no one was taking security seriously. So the only way to show people that they weren't taking security seriously was to kind of show that the emperor had no clothes. So for example, there was a company called HBRE Federal, which was a military contractor or defense contractor to the US Department of Defense. And the CEO used the same password for his World of Warcraft account as he did for his PayPal account and his emails and his company emails. And it wasn't because we were great hackers that we were able to do this. It's because people were doing dumb things like using the same password everywhere, for example. Or their websites were vulnerable to very basic vulnerabilities that everyone knows exists. But no one had the balls at the time to kind of like actually hack those companies and show that the emperor had no clothes. So it's kind of like a issue that everyone knew existed, but couldn't do anything about it.
And since that was like a government contractor, did they end up just getting no more work from that seems like a really bad breach.
Yeah, I mean, the CEO had to end up resigning. And I think there was like an investigation into them in Congress about how that happened.
And you were how old when you did that?
This was when I was 15 to 16.
I love it. And I mean, there are so many others. Like I listed a bunch, and you could really pick any other story that you want to tell. Like the Westboro Baptist Church was also kind of a funny one. Sony, there's another thing involving the Arab Spring that, I don't know if you want to tell another story.
Yeah, so I mean, Sony was a fun one because this was in the summer of 2011. There was kind of like big hack, like the PlayStation network was down for like a month, and like a lot of kids everywhere were really angry that the PlayStation network was down. But Sony is a perfect hacker target, or was a perfect hacker target at the time, because they just had prosecuted George Hotz for breaking the DRM of the Sony, and because he managed to install Linux on the PS3, and because it was such a great hacker target, like Sony was hacked around 30 times, or like in the summer of 2011, and they were hacked so many times by all these different people that it kind of like became a game to see who can hack them the most. So someone was keeping track, and it was like we hacked them 7 times, and this other hacker hacked them 6 times. So it was kind of like we won the race against this other hacker to see who can hack them the most in different ways. Like, you have like Sony Pictures, Sony Music. They have so many different areas of their business, and so many like such a big attack surface to attack. Westboro Baptist Church was also a fun one. The Westboro Baptist Church is this really controversial kind of hate group in the US that pickets, for example, the funerals of dead soldiers to say that they deserve to die because they were gay, and that kind of thing. And they kind of put out a press release challenging us to hack them. I think it makes sense for them because they need attention, but we managed to kind of hack them and hack their website on a live radio show. And it was kind of like they were being interviewed, and in the middle of the radio show, we kind of like put up, defaced their webpage, and then that video online, you can watch that video on YouTube. It's got like 3 million views on YouTube.
I love it. This is just so interesting because you were a teenager, as we mentioned. And so then at the age of 16, you got arrested. How did that happen, and what was that like?
Yeah, so I was arrested, and it turned out that there was an FBI informant in the group. He wasn't originally an FBI informant, but because he had 2 children that he was looking after, when he was caught by the FBI, he kind of turned into an informant that was logging everyone's chats in the chat rooms. And yeah, so I was arrested when I was 16, 1 month after I finished my exams. So that's pretty convenient, because if it was before, then it would have been more annoying. But And then I was arrested and I was taken to like a police station, and they did like a separate charge for each pack. So they had like 80 charges, and they have to arrest you for each charge. So every time they arrest you, they have to caution you by saying something along the lines of, you're not under arrest for this. You don't have to say anything, but if you do not say something that you later rely on in court, then this might harm your defense. They had to say that, they were supposed to say that 80 times for each arrest. But I gave a no comment interview. So my answer to each question they were asking was like no comment, because that's what I was advised by my lawyer to do. But they only managed to finish arresting me 40 times instead of 80 times, because there was a time limit to how long you can keep someone under 18 in custody without charging them. And unless it was for terrorism, unless I had some excuse like I was a terrorist or something, which I wasn't. And so they didn't manage to finish arresting me.
I can't even imagine what your parents must have thought. They probably were just like, what is going on?
Yeah, they had no idea.
All right, so clearly he's got a colorful history, and then he gets into crypto. So you got into Bitcoin. How did you go from that to getting into Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of like very naturally interested in Bitcoin because of my interest in BitTorrent and the Pirate Bay. Like when I was using BitTorrent, which was just a peer-to-peer file sharing system, I was interested to see, okay, like we can have decentralized file sharing. What else can be decentralized? So even before Bitcoin, people were trying to decentralize all kinds of things. Like so people were trying to create like a decentralized domain name system because they were worried that the Pirate Bay domain name would get shut down by ICANN, for example. They were trying to create like decentralized social media because they thought like Facebook would censor stuff during the Arab Spring, for example, or governments would try to censor that kind of thing. So when Bitcoin came around, that was kind of like naturally piqued my interest. And our hacker group accepted Bitcoin donations at the time. So that was kind of my first experience with Bitcoin. And it was also the case that, for example, WikiLeaks accepted donations in Bitcoin because they were blocked by Visa and MasterCard, so they had to use Bitcoin to accept donations. So that kind of like, that's when I first learned around Bitcoin in 2009, 2010, and that's when I kind of started following it. But then I was arrested in 2011, and I was not allowed to use internet according to my bail conditions for 2 years. So then I kind of like came back online in 2013, and I started following the space more closely in terms of the scalability debates, because at the time, like there was this 1 megabyte block size limit, and I was kind of like worried. I was like very into Bitcoin, so I was like, okay, at the time the main narrative was let's make Bitcoin accepted everywhere for payments, and retailers, even Microsoft, started accepting Bitcoin for payments, and different companies were experimenting with it. But then I was worried, okay, there's this 1 megabyte block size limit. What happens if it gets hit? So I started discussing this in these core developer chat rooms, and people weren't really worried about it. But then in 2013, the block size limit did actually get hit, and there was this huge internal war within the Bitcoin community about whether we should increase the block size or keep the block size small but scale with payment channels. And I was kind of very much on the side of increasing the block size. But the reason why they didn't want to increase the block size is because they thought it would make it more expensive to verify the chain, or for end users to run a full node to verify the chain, which kind of defeats the whole decentralized nature of Bitcoin. But in the Bitcoin white paper, Satoshi mentions this idea of fraud proofs, or what he calls alerts, which is the idea that a end user running a wallet on their phone, if even though they're not verifying every transaction in the chain, they could be alerted to an invalid block by a full node that has detected that is an invalid block. But this was like a very nascent idea that wasn't fully fleshed out, and there was problems to it, including the data availability problem. So then I kind of like decided to focus a lot on layer 1 scaling and how do we square this dilemma between decentralization and scalability.
Wait, and so what year was that?
So this was like 2013, 2014 when we started hitting the block size limit. And then in 2016, I started doing a PhD at UCL focusing on layer 1 scaling.
Okay, yeah, because in my head, at least, the block size wars didn't get settled until 2017 with like Bitcoin Cash. And even now, sometimes they still flare up again in case of, I don't know, some of you might notice that. But I guess at that point, that brings us to Celestia. So how did you go from that point to founding Celestia?
Yeah, so the current approach or the current thinking around how we should scale layer 1s, especially within the Ethereum community around 2016, 2017, was mainly centered around this idea of sharding the chain. So the idea of sharding is like you have a layer 1 chain, but can we split up that chain into multiple chains that each have their own validators that can process transactions in parallel? And this was like what the original Ethereum 2.0 vision was. It was going to have like 1,024 shards. And I co-authored the first smart contract sharding paper called Chainspace during my time at UCL. And that was later kind of spun out into a company that was acquired by Facebook. But when I was working on this, to me there was a massive missing piece of the puzzle to making sharding work, and this is also known in the Ethereum community. And that piece of the puzzle was, how do you protect yourself, or how can a network protect itself from malicious shards? Because when you're sharding the chain, you're also sharding the security of the chain to all these shards. So like if you split up the chain into 10 chains, you're also kind of splitting up the security of the chain into 10 chains in some way. So you can't assume that every shard, so what happens if one of the shards is dishonest and starts infecting invalid state to all the shards? So the essential kind of like missing piece of the puzzle was a way to detect that shards were misbehaving, and that would basically, you would use fraud proofs to do that, which is the idea that Satoshi mentioned in his white paper when he released it in 2008. This idea of alerts. But the problem with fraud proofs or alerts is that you can't, if the malicious shard does not publish the data in that shard, then you can't prove that anything bad happened. You can't generate a fraud proof. So the missing piece to the puzzle was this data availability problem to make the whole system secure. So then I kind of started researching it, and I saw that Vitalik had done some thinking around that, and he had a note on GitHub to how that can be solved. And I started kind of chatting with him, and I kind of realized that this was actually a fundamental. I was surprised that people weren't talking about it more, because it was it's like such a fundamental element to blockchain scaling. And I co-authored the paper with Vitalik on how to implement this and proving the security. And basic idea is that you can have data availability proofs to prove to other shards or to users that data is available. But then I kind of realized that data availability is actually the core primitive for blockchain. So at the time, people were thinking about blockchain scalability from a top-down perspective. Like, okay, we have shards, and how do we make them secure? But then at the bottom of the entire stack is data availability. So then I started thinking about it from the bottom. If you start from that, what do you get? Because it turns out that the core thing that a blockchain does is just a proof of publication. It's a proof of publication system, and that's what's mentioned in the Bitcoin white paper. Satoshi doesn't even mention the word blockchain in the white paper. He mentions a timestamping server. He refers to the Bitcoin system as a timestamping server where you publish data into it. So the core primitive of all of these things is this proof of publication system. And it turns out that if you scale that, that's all you need. And that's indeed the primitive to all rollups. And so that's when I kind of started Lazy Ledger. I wrote a paper about Lazy Ledger, which is what Celestia now is, which is basically a blockchain that is lazy in the sense that it only does the core things that layer 1 does, which is just publish data and have consensus over that data. And that's what Celestia is. And it turns out if you just have that as a core primitive and scale it, then anyone can build anything on top of it.
Polkadot is the original and largest Layer 0 blockchain with over 2,000 plus developers. The anticipated Polkadot 2.0 upgrade will be a massive accelerator for the ecosystem, upgrading the infrastructure with 8 times higher transaction throughput and twice as fast block times, tailored core time for the needs of every protocol, trustless bridges to multiple chains, and revised tokenomics with a token burn to reduce inflation. Perfect for GameFi and DeFi to build, grow, and scale. Get your Web3 ideas to market fast. Think big, build bigger with Polkadot. Join the community at polkadot.network/ecosystem/community. PlayFi uses cutting-edge AI and blockchain technology to transform content into real-time data. Their AI agents watch games, live streams, sports, and more, converting terabytes of video into actionable on-chain data, helping studios, brands, and creators find new ways to engage and monetize whatever the world is watching and playing. Discover more about PlayFi's upcoming node license sale, launching the world's first decentralized network for mass market content. Visit playfi.ai to learn more.
Yeah, I love how the two core pieces, one comes from Satoshi and the other from Vitalik, which is sort of a metaphor for crypto today generally. So we're going to talk more about Celestia, but before we go on a little bit further, can you just define, I'm sure a lot of people know, but just to level set that, what data availability sampling is?
Sure. I mean, why don't I start with data availability? So as I mentioned, it's the core primitive of what a blockchain does. All a blockchain does is it's just basically a system that proves that some data has been published. And it tells you when that data has been published. So if you know that some data has been published and you know when that data has been published, then you can build, you basically have a ledger in which you can build any decentralized application on top, including applications like cryptocurrency or payments. But what data availability sampling does is it allows users to verify that the data has actually been published without requiring users to actually download all the data themselves. Because if going back to this Bitcoin block size war, remember that the whole reason why the Bitcoin community did not want to increase the block size over 1 megabyte is because they were worried that if you make the blocks too big, then the only people that would be able to verify the chain are like big players who have access to data centers and big hardware. And if that's the case, then that kind of defeats the whole point of blockchains, because then you have to trust the miners, you have to trust the validators. If no one can verify the chain, then the miners basically have the freedom to change the rules of the chain, to print money, to change people's balances, for example. And the whole point of a blockchain is that you're not supposed to rely on any committee to enforce the protocol rules. It's like the end user who's verifying the chain directly should be able to enforce the protocol rules. So what data availability sampling allows you to do is it allows you to basically very efficiently, with like an end user can very efficiently check that the data has been published without them having to download the whole data, which basically circumvents this original problem that Bitcoin community had with increasing the block size, because now you can increase the block size without damaging the ability for end users to actually verify that the chain is correct. Because now they can check the data is published, and if they know that the data is published, they know that someone can generate a fraud proof or prove that something bad happened on chain if the validators were dishonest.
And so Celestia finally launched last fall. What do you feel has been going well, and what have you been surprised by?
Yeah, so we launched October 31st on Halloween. And I think there's definitely been a massive expansion. I think I've definitely been surprised by the amount of product market fit we've had. Because when we launched, there were no chains at all that had the ability to support data blobs. Like this was before EIP 444. So when Celestia launched, there was this extremely pressing need in the industry that we just needed a place for these rollups to post data blobs cheaply. And so now we've seen kind of like an influx of rollups post their data to Celestia. There's something like 20 OP stack chains posting the data to Celestia right now, and many more in the pipeline. So there's this kind of like extreme kind of like product market fit. So I think that's going well, especially with like I always kind of envisioned 2 years ago that, like or even 3 years ago, my vision when I created Celestia was that one day you'll be able to go on some website and you'll be able to click a button and immediately launch a rollup, your own rollup, which is basically a virtual blockchain. And that's now possible today. And I didn't imagine that would happen that quickly. But now we have many different rollup as a service providers like Caldera, Contribute, and Gelato that all make that possible. And now we're seeing that the default way for developers to deploy decentralized applications is not to use smart contracts on a shared smart contract environment, but to deploy their own rollup using these providers that let you do it in one single click. And like, if you asked me 3 years ago if that would be happen that quickly, I wouldn't have kind of believed it, but it has.
Wow, that is super interesting to me, because it goes very much against kind of like the idea of the fat protocols thesis, in the sense that kind of almost assumes that there will just be very few. But I love this idea that there could be many different blockchains. So what is on the Celestia roadmap now that you're looking forward to?
Yeah, I think there was a few things that was presented by Ismail earlier today, but the roadmap kind of revolves around three main things. The first thing is this idea of abundant block space. So we want to have 1 gigabyte blocks, and this is very important because what we've seen in blockchain in history is that use cases have always been limited by supply of block space. Like even in Bitcoin, I mentioned that Bitcoin was used for payments before 2013, and retailers like Microsoft actually stopped accepting Bitcoin for payments. So there's actually a period of history where there was more retailers accepting Bitcoin, and then they stopped accepting Bitcoin. And the reason for that is because there wasn't enough block space. And so the transaction fees were too high, so it didn't make sense. No one was using Bitcoin for payments. So you have this idea where, kind of like the early internet, more bandwidth made different use cases possible. Like YouTube would not be possible today with the average internet bandwidth or speed that people had in the early 2000s. If we increase block sizes and have more abundant data throughput, it will enable applications and use cases that simply weren't possible before, or no one had imagined before. Especially like more payments on that lower value payments. Like imagine you could stream 1 microcent payments, and that was actually possible because we had the block space for it, for example. And so like so the idea is like we brought block space from the dial-up era to the early broadband era, and now as part of the roadmap, we want to bring it to the fiber optic era with 1 gigabyte blocks. The other part of the roadmap is to have a widespread adoption of trust minimized light nodes. So like instead of wallets connecting to centralized RPC endpoints like Infura and Alchemy, and this was a massive criticism of Web3 as it stands today by Moxie Marlinspike, who's the creator of Signal, that you're basically like, what's the point of Web3 if you're just connecting to these centralized RPC endpoints that tell you what the state of the chain is and you have to trust them? That's how most people interact with Web3 today. They just interact with Infura or Alchemy. But we want to see a world where you can actually, these wallets are connecting directly to the network, to the peer-to-peer network, and verifying the state directly with these light nodes. And we're one step closer to there because now we have a Celestia data availability sampling light node that you can actually run in your browser. And that's a very important first step to making sure that those light nodes can be embedded within wallets. And finally, the final kind of piece of the puzzle or part of the roadmap is this idea where, okay, we're going to have abundant block space, but we also want the block space to be frictionless and useful. So like developers want access to liquidity. We don't want to have an ecosystem where you have 1,000 rollups and they're all fragmented and it's hard to bridge across them. So as part of that, we have this, we've been working on this concept called ZK accounts, where you basically can have a Celestia account controlled by a ZK program, and that will basically allow rollups to bridge directly to Celestia and with each other so you can kind of think about it as like a more generalized version of Polygon's AG layer, in the sense like the ZK accounts itself is not an AG layer, but you can build an AG layer on top of it. So it's this kind of like very generalized primitive that that could be a powerful primitive to use to connect all these rollups together in a verified way, instead of having so many fragmented rollups.
And so just to explain that a little bit further, so you have the ZK account, and so it sounds like more like a control center, and there's more execution in the rollups, or can you?
Yeah, so it's like the idea is you basically assume that, so you have an account that where the account, the funds in the account can be controlled by a ZK program. So you can imagine that you can express any rollup as a ZK program, even if it's an optimistic rollup. You can have ZK fraud proofs, for example. So now basically it means that any rollups can directly have a trust minimized bridge with Celestia. Now that's already possible today with Ethereum, for example. So that's basically making something that's possible with Ethereum now possible with Celestia. But the main difference is because I think Celestia is more suited towards this use case of defragmenting liquidity. Because the reason for that is because one of the reasons for that is because Celestia supports IBC, which means that now, unlike Ethereum rollups, which only have access to assets within the Ethereum ecosystem, Celestia has a native way to bridge assets outside of the trust zone of Celestia and its rollups using IBC. So, for example, you have projects like Noble, and you have Circle issuing USDC on Noble, and you can have IBC bridge from Noble to Celestia to that rollup. And so that kind of like gives you access to a much wider network of assets, because whereas Ethereum, your liquidity, your trust zone, your native bridging zone is kind of limited to Ethereum and the rollups. With Celestia, you have Celestia, the rollups, and also any chain that supports IBC, basically.
Okay, and then there's also this concept lazy bridging. Is that different?
Yeah, so lazy bridging is kind of like a lifestyle that encompasses ZK accounts, and the idea is that users are kind of fed up with this fragmentation. So they just want to be lazy. So it's called lazy for 3 reasons. That the users want to be lazy, and also Celestia L1 is minimal, and so like it's a lazy protocol. And the idea of lazy bridging is that it's ZK account combined with technologies like chain abstraction and things like intents. And if you combine all these technologies together, like ZK accounts and chain abstraction and intents and cross-chain contract calls, then you can basically, and things like AG layers as well, then you can basically have a seamless user experience where the user basically feels they're only interacting with one chain, and they don't even know they're interacting with different chains, and they don't have to worry about the security assumptions of all these different chains, because everything is kind of unified in a lazy way. And so that's why it's called lazy bridging.
And so when Celestia achieves its vision, then kind of like what will that overall user experience be like? Part of it will be lazy.
Yeah. I mean, the user experience should be like you're interacting with one chain. You open your wallet, you see all the assets you have, even if those assets are across many different chains. Let's say you have assets on 10 different chains. You want to use those assets to mint an NFT on some other chain. You shouldn't have to care what assets those chains are on. Like, you just care about the end user actions. Like the chains should be completely abstracted to the user, similar to how, like, if you use the web today and using different websites on the web, the user has no idea what infrastructure those websites are using. Like, they don't know if they're using Amazon AWS or Google Cloud. The idea is to achieve a similar experience with Web3, such that the only thing that the user sees is a wallet, right? And they see assets in that wallet, but they don't need to care about which chain those assets are hosted, or they don't have to care about bridging those assets through some canonical bridge and performing multiple transactions and making sure they have liquidity and so on and so forth to perform different actions that they want to do on chain.
And so when you kind of tie together like everything that you've done with computers since you were 6 or 7 or 8, if you think about kind of like the different principles that led you originally to do the hacktivism, and then why you got into Bitcoin, like ultimately, what do you think it is that people will be able to do with DeFi or with crypto once all this is built?
I mean, ultimately, I just want to see a return to the decentralized web, because in the late 90s, there wasn't big tech companies like Google, Facebook, or Twitter. Like in the early 2000s and late 90s, people were using people hosted their own blogs. People had the bulletin boards. People had peer-to-peer connection. Even Skype was peer-to-peer. Like Skype, you just connect directly to someone's IP address. People were using IRC. So that was kind of like a internet that a lot of people miss. And now we have this very centralized internet controlled by 3 or 4 big companies like Facebook and Twitter and Google. So we've seen the pendulum swing between decentralization and centralization. And now we're starting to see the pendulum swing back from centralization to decentralization. And I think having abundant block space is vital to ensure that pendulum actually swings back. And so that the default way for people to develop applications is to simply deploy them on a blockchain instead of being forced to to insert themselves as intermediaries, because that's the only technology available. Like, it should be seamless to just create these services like Uber, Airbnb, or even social media by just deploying them on a blockchain with no intermediaries.
And then, so for users, like right now, we, pay Uber to take our rides, or we give our data to Facebook or Twitter, and then they run ads against it. So that's the current web. And so we'll probably do very similar activities, but in a different way. So what will that look like?
Well, it will look like you can have private payments where you can pay people directly without requiring Visa, MasterCard, or PayPal have access to your entire transaction history, for example. You can trade assets. You can, whether it's meme coins or actual assets that are backed by some value, without having to sign up to Robinhood and having them cancel your buy button because it wasn't in their interests. People can create their own social communities, whether using platforms like Farcaster, and moderate their own social communities without having to be beholden by some global set of community rules imposed by Facebook or Twitter, or some algorithm imposed by Facebook and Twitter, for example.
Okay, well, is there anything else about Celestia or about the modular stack that you would like to talk about?
I think that covers it very well, but maybe people have questions.
Can you talk more about the connection between ZK accounts and the Agler, which you mentioned?
Yeah, I think you can kind of think of ZK accounts as a more generalized version, or a primitive, lower level primitive than Agler, that you can build an Agler on top of a ZK account. Because a ZK account is basically just a normal blockchain account that's controlled by a ZK program. And you can have multiple layers of ZK recursion on top of that ZK account. So it's you can basically think the same way that Ethereum LA1 is a primitive that can be used to create an egg layer. ZK accounts are also a very general primitive that can be used to create an egg layer.
So can chains settle on Celestia after that?
Well, I mean, settlement is a loaded term. We kind of you can argue settlement, but the way that we're looking at it is not as in we're not trying to pitch Celestia as some global settlement layer that competes with Ethereum. The way that we're looking at it is developers have this need that they want to be able to have access to liquidity and have access to assets, and we're basically providing a basic kind of functionality or basic improvement to fulfill that need. But it's not the case that Celestia is a settlement layer in the sense that Celestia will not have a DEX, will not have a Uniswap. So it's not like you're bridging it. It's not like it's way more limited than Ethereum. It's more likely the settlement layer will be something on top of Celestia using a ZK account, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
2 quick questions. First one, how many light nodes are enough? And the second is, what's the rough timeline for ZK accounts?
How many light nodes are enough? Well, I mean, the ambitious target is 1 billion light nodes. I mean, it seems very ambitious and unrealistic, but if we have if we have 1 billion browsers, and if light nodes are so resource non-intensive that the idea is that users can just run them, that your wallet will automatically embed a light node without you even knowing it, then I think that is possible. Like, there's probably 1 billion connections to Infura. Just replace those with light nodes, and having hundreds of millions or 1 billion light nodes is feasible. In terms of the second question, when the timeline for ZK accounts, I would say it's hard to say because it's ultimately dependent on a decentralized governance process. So there's currently a working group, Celestia Improvement Proposal Working Group, to add ZK accounts to the base layer. But I would probably guess somewhere by the end of the year.
I wanted to ask also like something related to ZK accounts. So essentially, it feels like that ZK accounts not turn like, but add like a ZK like verification functionality like to Celestia. What do you think about also using like Celestia as for like a prover market, so that you like, because like essentially, right? So this like temporary storing like function is very good fit for like prover markets because they only need to store like the large blue for like a short period of time, and it sort of like adds like another like value, and now you have like you go like from modular to like integrated low, like if you like you can put so. Thanks.
Is the question more like, can you do a prover market on Celestia, or?
Well, yes, can you do that? And like second, what do you think about it? Is it like a good idea in general, or like it makes no sense?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could build a proof of market on Celestia, but I think more importantly that Celestia will heavily depend on proof of markets. I think proof of markets are a very important piece of the puzzle to making ZK accounts kind of like widely adopted. Because as we know, like proving ZK programs is very expensive. And I think teams like Succinct and RiskZero are kind of doing good work there in terms of creating marketplaces or providing proving services to people that need them.
If sort of the whole technical roadmap of Celestia, like everything falls into place, what's sort of the next points that are sort of that's a friction point, or this worries me, like this needs more attention? Is there anything on your mind?
I guess the roadmap I propose is very high level. So like 1 gigabyte blocks, it's kind of hard to say, like it's such a high level roadmap. That's kind of hard to predict what the friction points will be after that already. But I would say, like, if you're trying to think ahead, I think like Zach from Aztec made some very good points about this. It's like how will people, if like crypto is widely adopted, how will people look back at us in 20, 30 years and think of us? Will they think positively of us or negatively of us? And there's a very likely and possible route where they will think negatively of us, because we're just going to end up in this hellscape where we've created a worse financial system than Visa and MasterCard, because there's no privacy, right? So it's like everything is on-chain. There's no payment privacy. And it's just a hyper-financialized ecosystem where it's kind of like people have nostalgia to what we have now, where it's like just like more cash-based. For example, you can use cash. So I think if we don't carefully think about like what the true values of Web3 are and try to build according to those values, like making sure that we do care about privacy, we do embed privacy into the systems, like teams like Penumbra and Aztec have been doing, that we don't enshrine powerful interests, like we don't, and that's why trust minimized light nodes are important. We don't have governance systems that are plutocratic, where it's just the token holders decides what goes. I think it's important to stick to those values so that we're not looked on negatively in 20, 30 years, because crypto and blockchains is like, it's not a good or bad technology. Technology is neutral. Like blockchains can be used for bad, and dictators have wanted to use blockchains to create their own coins in their own countries.
Okay, well, I guess we're ending on a bleak note, but this was actually a really engaging, wonderful talk. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Mustafa. Don't forget, next up is the weekly news recap, today presented by Wondercraft AI. Stick around for This Week in Crypto after this short break. Did you know you can buy and sell crypto with tax benefits in an individual retirement account or IRA? iTrust Capital makes this possible. But what does this mean? When you buy crypto outside an IRA, like on an exchange, you face taxes on gains. But in a Roth IRA, gains would be tax-free. iTrust Capital also has the lowest fees in the industry and 24/7 accessibility. Start now and maximize your retirement savings with iTrust Capital.
Welcome to this week's Crypto Roundup. In today's recap, we cover the SEC ending its stablecoin probe, Celsius suing users over withdrawals, Polychain's accusations against a former partner, new Senate crypto legislation, Solana's Fire Dancer milestone, Starkware's staking proposal, Aave's criticism of MakerDAO, a Cambodian crypto scam, BlackRock's Beetle Fund milestone, Bonk reclaiming its meme coin spot, and the GOP's new pro-crypto platform. Thanks for tuning in to the weekly news recap. Let's begin. SEC ends stablecoin probe, marking a win for the crypto industry. The Securities and Exchange Commission ended its investigation into New York-based stablecoin issuer Paxos, marking a significant win for the crypto industry. Fortune reported that the SEC's acting chief of the Crypto Assets and Cyber Unit, Jorge Tenreiro, informed Paxos that no enforcement action would be recommended, citing a letter shared with the news outlet. This decision comes over a year after Paxos received a Wells notice regarding its dollar-backed BUSD stablecoin, which was issued in partnership with Binance. This development follows the SEC's recent partial defeat in a lawsuit against Binance, with a federal judge dismissing a charge that stated sales of BUSD were a securities offering. Paxos's head of strategy, Walter Hessert, expressed relief, noting that the end of the investigation should provide the stablecoin market with more certainty in the U.S. Celsius sues users who made large withdrawals pre-bankruptcy. Bankrupt crypto lender Celsius initiated lawsuits against thousands of creditors who withdrew over $100,000 from the platform shortly before it declared bankruptcy. On July 1st, Celsius's litigation administrator filed these complaints in the U.S. Bankruptcy Court for the Southern District of New York, targeting funds that were transferred out within the 90 days preceding Celsius's Chapter 11 filing. Litigation administrator Mohsin Megji stated that those who withdrew funds before the bankruptcy unfairly benefited at the expense of other account holders. Previously, Celsius settled with 1,500 account holders, recovering $100 million from those with preference liabilities. The Litigation Oversight Committee emphasized that non-settling account holders should expect aggressive efforts to reclaim the full value of their withdrawals. An account holder known as Medix0 criticized the lawsuit, noting that Celsius is seeking recovery based on current cryptocurrency values, not the values at the time of the withdrawals in 2022. Delphi Labs General Counsel Gabriel Shapiro commented, "Gotta love the way these crypto bankruptcies are shaping up. Money they owe you is priced at market bottoms. Money you fake owe them is priced at market tops. Unfettered bullshit, I tell you." Celsius, which once managed over $20 billion in assets from 1.7 million users, faced significant challenges following the collapse of the Terra ecosystem. The company froze withdrawals in June 2022 and filed for bankruptcy in July, citing liquidity issues. Polychain accuses ex-partner of secret deal with portfolio company. CoinDesk reported that Polychain Capital has accused its former general partner, Niraj Pant, of making an undisclosed deal with its portfolio company Eclipse Labs, which violated the firm's policies. Former Eclipse CEO Neil Samani allegedly allocated Pant 5% of Eclipse tokens, later reduced to 1.33% as an incentive for securing Polychain's investment. Pant confirmed he received advisor tokens but claimed the deal was finalized post-investment. Polychain, however, states they were unaware of this financial relationship until after Pant's departure. Despite this, Polychain's investment in Eclipse has reportedly increased in value tenfold since 2022. Vijay Chetty, the current CEO of Eclipse Labs, who stepped in after its former CEO was accused of sexual harassment by multiple individuals, wrote on X, "Eclipse Labs' history has been messy. I stepped up as CEO to clean up this company and chart us on a new path forward." Samani has denied the harassment allegations. Senate crypto hearing spurs legislative push. Unchained reported on Monday that an upcoming Senate Agriculture Committee hearing could signal a Democratic push to engage crypto voters. On Wednesday, during this hearing, committee chairwoman Debbie Stabenow indicated her intent to share the language of a new crypto bill with fellow members by the end of the week. This proposed legislation aims to grant the Commodity Futures Trading Commission regulatory authority over digital commodities. Stabenow emphasized the need for clear regulations to foster innovation while protecting consumers from bad actors in the crypto market. She highlighted the urgency of establishing comprehensive federal legislation, noting that global counterparts have already recognized the importance of such measures. Committee ranking member John Boozman has collaborated with Stabenow, but expressed concerns about stakeholder support for the bill as it currently stands. The proposed legislation seeks to ensure crypto firms hold sufficient capital reserves, maintain strict cybersecurity standards, and provide accurate information to retail customers. Additionally, it aims to secure permanent funding for the CFTC to oversee the digital commodity market. Trump's GOP platform pledges to halt crypto crackdown. It's not only Democrats who are making a push for crypto voters. The Republican National Committee has officially adopted a platform that aims to support cryptocurrency innovation. The document, reflecting former U.S. President Donald Trump's increasing interest in digital assets, pledges to end the Democrats', quote, unlawful and un-American crypto crackdown, end quote, and oppose the creation of a central bank digital currency. It also defends the right to mine Bitcoin and self-custody digital assets. Trump, who has launched several branded NFT sets and accepts crypto donations, has reversed his previous skepticism towards cryptocurrency and is now showing strong support for the sector. He is set to speak at the Bitcoin 2024 conference in Nashville later this month. Starkware proposes incremental staking plan for Starknet. Starkware announced a phased approach to introducing staking for its Layer 2 network, Starknet. On Wednesday, the company submitted the Starknet Net Improvement Proposal to the network's GitHub page, outlining plans to enhance network resilience and decentralization. In the initial stage, stakers will run a full node, interact with staking smart contracts, and adhere to Starkware's rules. The process will require community approval through a governance vote, as stated by Starkware spokesperson Nathan Jaffe. Future stages will demand additional validating software for sequencing and proving activities. Starkware aims to balance economic incentives while maintaining a sustainable inflation rate. Staking rewards will adjust dynamically based on the amount of Stark locked. Since its February debut at $1.95, Stark has dropped nearly 70% to 59 cents, with a market cap of $762 million. Aave DAO criticizes MakerDAO over Spark profit-sharing deal. Tensions have arisen between DeFi giants Aave and MakerDAO regarding a profit-sharing agreement for the Sparklen protocol. Mark Zeller, founder of Aavechan Initiative, accused MakerDAO of creative accounting that reduces Aave's profit share from the agreed 10% to around 1%. Sparklen, a fork of Aave v3, generated $42 million in revenue over the past year, according to Masari. Despite Spark's total value locked reaching $2.8 billion, Aave claims they are underpaid. Aave DAO is currently voting on 3 options to resolve the situation: declaring Spark in breach of agreement, approving new terms, or maintaining the current arrangement. MakerDAO founder Rune Christensen expressed disappointment over the contentious reset of the relationship. Cambodian ruling family linked to $11 billion crypto scam. A firm linked to Cambodia's ruling family is allegedly running an $11 billion crypto scam operation, according to Elliptic. The blockchain analytics firm alleges that Huyoni Guarantee, an online marketplace, facilitates crypto scams and money laundering services. Elliptic revealed that Hun To, the nephew of Cambodia's Prime Minister Hun Manet, is a director for one of Huyoni's units connected to these illicit activities. Since 2021, Huyoni-associated crypto wallets have received over $11 billion. The firm operates various services, including a payments app called Huyoni Pay. Elliptic's report suggests that the majority of transactions on Huyoni Guarantee are tied to illegal activities, including money laundering and fraud. Solana's FireDancer builds first testnet block. On Wednesday, Jump Crypto's FireDancer, a high-performance validator client for Solana, successfully built its first block on the Solana testnet. Under development since 2022, FireDancer aims to boost Solana's transaction processing capabilities with its implementation of the C++ programming language and sharding support. Helios Labs CEO Mert Mumtaz praised FireDancer as one of the most performant pieces of open-source software ever created. Solana has relied on a single validator client until now, unlike Ethereum, which has multiple. the addition of FireDancer enhances Solana's security and decentralization. FireDancer promises significant advancements over Solana's current throughput of around 3,000 TPS. Bonk reclaims top Solana meme coin spot from Whiff. Bonk has overtaken YF to become the most valuable meme coin in the Solana ecosystem. In the past week, Bonk's price surged by 20%, boosting its market cap to $1.73 billion, while YF's value dropped by 11.2%, reducing its market cap to $1.63 billion. Despite having similar market caps, Bonk boasts 741,352 holders compared to WF's 163,683, according to Solscan. Bonk DAO is currently voting to burn nearly $2.2 million worth of Bonk, a move expected to drive up the value of the remaining tokens. Together, Bonk and YF account for about 7.6% of the total meme coin market cap, which stands at nearly $3.4 billion. BlackRock's Beetle Fund reaches $500 million milestone. BlackRock's tokenized treasury fund, Beetle, achieved a market value of over $500 million on Tuesday, becoming the first fund of its kind to surpass the $500 million mark. Launched in March on the Ethereum blockchain through a partnership with Securitized Markets, Beetle offers institutional investors yields on tokenized U.S. treasuries. The tokenized treasury market has grown significantly, reaching a total value of $1.8 billion this year. BlackRock's Beetle Fund is among the 6 real-world asset products that Arbitrum DAO voted to invest $25 million worth of ARB tokens into to diversify its treasury. In related news, Wall Street titan Goldman Sachs will launch 3 tokenization projects by the end of the year, according to Matthew McDermott, Goldman Sachs' global head of digital assets. These initiatives will focus on issuing real-world assets on blockchains, marking a significant expansion in the bank's crypto offerings. Time for fun bits. WorldCoin's billion user dream falls 994 million short. WorldCoin set an ambitious goal of onboarding 1 billion users by 2023, but fell short by a mere 994 million. As of July 2024, they've verified 6 million users. At this rate, they'll need to scan the eyes of 2,734 people daily to hit their goal by 2026. No pressure, right? Founded by OpenAI's Sam Altman, WorldCoin is facing an orb shortage with only 300 to 500 orbs in action. They claim to have 2,000 orbs, but even then, each orb needs to scan 700 people daily to make it happen. Despite their grand plans, global restrictions and curious investigations are slowing things down. But hey, at least operations are back on in Kenya and South Korea. Keep those orbs rolling, WorldCoin. And that's all. Thanks so much for joining us today. If you enjoyed this recap, go to unchainedcrypto.substack.com, that is unchainedcrypto.substack.com, and sign up for our free newsletter so that you can stay up to date with the latest in crypto. Unchained is produced by Laura Shin, with help from Matt Pilchard, Juan Aronovich, Megan Gavis, Pam Majumdar, and Margaret Curia. The weekly recap was written by Juan Aronovich and edited by Kari McMahon. Thanks for listening.
Unchained is now a part of the CoinDesk Podcast Network. For the latest in digital assets, check out Markets Daily, 5 days a week, with host Noel Atchison. Follow the CoinDesk Podcast Network for some of the best shows in crypto.